horror genre arguably got started on a June night in 1816 when Lord Byron challenged his companions at Lake Geneva to write ghost stories to tell each other. That challenge resulted in Frankenstein and the modern vampire as we know it. Now here's the part where it'll probably sound like I'm reaching. I think it's that origin story with a group of storytellers sitting around a fire that has led horror to be drawn to anthologies and horror hosts. It's probably no shock to you all that I, someone who talks about horror movies on the internet, have a huge love for horror hosts. And while the internet has changed a lot, I thought we could look back at the history of how we got here. Vampira, played by actress Mila Nurmi, was the first horror host. For a single season from April 30th, 1954 to April 2nd, 1955, the Vampira show ran on KABC in Los Angeles with the glamour ghoul in her long, tight black dress, reclining on a Victorian couch, introducing movies. Now, that probably sounds a bit familiar to a lot of you who have never even seen Vampira, but she was the first to do it. She was Morticia Addams before Morticia Addams. Literally, she based her look on the nameless character from Charles Addams' cartoons in The New Yorker, who wouldn't be known as Morticia until the TV adaptation a decade later. What's really crazy about the character of Vampira and her influence is her short tenure. A year in, ABC tried to buy the character from Nurmi. She refused. They canceled her. That was it for Vampira, but she started a format that would thrive and launch a million monster kids. Then in 1957, Universal Studios packaged 52 of their classic horror films as shock theater and distributed them around the US for television syndication and encouraged the use of hosts for the broadcasts. This led to a wave of late-night costumed hosts taking to the air to introduce the films, with standouts like John Zachary, originally appearing as Roland in Philadelphia before moving to New York and presenting as Zachary, becoming nationwide sensations. Zachary really leaned into the horror comedy side of things and incorporated cutaway gags parodying the films he was presenting, which has kind of become the standard. Zachary even had a hit record with Dinner for Drac, breaking the top 10 in 1958. And that's sort of what my introduction to Zachary was, not Dinner with Drac in 1958, but from rock and roll. He and the Ghastly Ones do a great cover of CCR's Sinister Purpose on Rob Zombie's Halloween Hootenanny compilation. The shock theater package hitting television created a monster craze in the late 50s that would also benefit from Forrest J. Ackerman's famous Monsters of Filmland magazine and comics like Tales from the Crypt. While the horror hosts of the era were mostly made up of weathermen and other personalities already employed by the respective stations presenting archival films, during the late 50s, a genre series would emerge that would change everything. Rod Serling was already an established name in television when he created The Twilight Zone, an anthology series which presented original sci-fi, fantasy, and horror tales which used the freedom of genre storytelling to tackle stories and themes that he felt were being suppressed and censored elsewhere. The show, with Serling narrating through each standalone story until its twist ending, is one of the most beloved franchises in television history and has spawned a movie, countless imitations, and 3 revivals, including an upcoming version executive produced and hosted by Jordan Peele. While The Twilight Zone brought about a new kind of horror host, one that presented original material, it didn't mean that the late night schlock hosts went anywhere. In fact, they thrived through the 60s with names like Ghoulardi, Sammy Terry, and Mona Lisa ruling their local airwaves. Some of the characters from the original Monster Craze are still going, like how Mark Carter replaced his father Bob as Sammy Terry, and Rich Koz took over the reins as Svengoolie, first replacing Jerry G. Bishop as son of Svengoolie from 1979 to 1986. Then when the show was resurrected in 1995, Bishop encouraged Koz to drop son of, and he's been Svengoolie ever since, now expanded from the original Chicago market to reach audiences nationwide Saturday nights on MeTV. While the horror host didn't go anywhere through the 70s, popularity did dip a bit, but there was a resurgence in the early 80s thanks to the Mistress of the Dark herself, Elvira. The origin story of Elvira actually circles us back to Vampira, which shouldn't really come as any kind of surprise. Looking to revive Fright Night, not the movie which featured a horror host, but the LA area horror show that had been hosted by Sinister Seymour, producers reached out to Mila Nurmi. She was on board, but according to Wikipedia, she wanted Lola Falana to take over the role. The producers said no, and Nurmi walked, which was kinda her thing. Auditions were held to find a new hostess, and Cassandra Peterson won the job. But since Nurmi owned Vampira, remember she refused to sell the rights, the character of Elvira was created. As you can expect, there were some lawsuits, but it was ruled that the characters just shared a close resemblance that, if anything, could be sourced back to Charles Addams. The hostess of Movie Macabre went on to be a media sensation throughout the 1980s and has been a staple of pop culture ever since. In fact, there's rumors of another sequel to Mistress of the Dark and talk that a new version of Elvira's Movie Macabre may be making its way to Netflix. Now, it was at the very end of the 80s that arguably the greatest horror host of the greatest horror anthology series made his debut. Tales from the Crypt sounds so weird it had to work. I mean, someone said, let's have a puppet corpse introduce a bunch of short films starring and created by A A-list Hollywood talent based on horror comic books from the 1950s, and they said it with a straight face, and then it actually worked, thanks in large part to the John Kassir voiced Crypt Keeper, who would also make the leap to Saturday mornings with the markedly tamer Tales from the Crypt Keeper. There are definitely a group of horror fans around my age who would cite the Crypt Keeper as their first horror host, but for me, that honor goes to a group of Canadian kids sitting around a campfire. The Midnight Society of Are You Afraid of the Dark met weekly, with each member taking a turn submitting a tale for approval. It wasn't a traditional horror host setup for sure, but it was an effective one that cultivated a new group of monster kids. Are You Afraid of the Dark is even moving to the big screen. It and Annabelle creation scribe Gary Dauberman has written the film, which is due in theaters this fall. But beyond Kids in the Woods, the 90s also saw the emergence of something else that would change the landscape of horror hosts: the internet. Count Gordevole of Washington, D.C., who originally broadcasted from 1973 to 1987, lays claim to being the first horror host on the internet, with his online series which dates back to 1998. But it's not just existing hosts taking to the web. The last few years has seen a rise in a new generation of horror hosts, like Blair Bathory of Fear House, who has been hosting her carefully curated selections of short horror since May of 2015. The show is now weekly with new episodes on Wednesdays, and they've even expanded to a Fear House Watch Club group on Facebook for fans of the series to join the discussion. There's also Deadflix, hosted by Hellbound video store clerk Morgul from the team at Grindmind. Their series is an anthology of original short films with new episodes coming monthly. So like the horror host going back to the 50s, even the internet has hosts who introduce pre-produced films and hosts who present original works. And of course, I can't forget Joe Bob. Joe Bob Briggs is a bit different than your usual horror host, having originally been known as a drive-in critic before hosting Drive-In Theater and Monster Vision. These days, he set up shop with the folks over at Shudder, where the last drive-in knocked out 3 epic marathons in 2018, and now news is out that a weekly series will be coming to the streaming platform in the new year. Look, I know I missed a bunch here, including Grandpa Al, but who's your favorite horror host? Do you prefer original anthologies or archive presentations? Let us know in the comments, and remember, Fright, Hype, and Crypt TV are all over the internet. Until next time, keep the horror on the screen and off the streets.
Watch new vids every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, only on Crypt TV.